Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking on probably the most ambitious subject possible: how to achieve sustainable world peace.
It's a big one.
A huge one. But we're not talking about military strategy or satellite surveillance. We are tackling this with a research-backed blueprint. It's called the Peace Mainstreaming Strategy. So our mission here for you, the listener, is to really move past the traditional stuff, the treaties, the geopolitics. We want to distill this down to the core actionable factors for peace.
Yeah, and that means looking at things that often get ignored when conflict breaks out.
Exactly. We're focusing on psychology, the individual, and national legislation, the foundational elements.
Right. And the first thing we really have to do is shift how we even define peace. We're not just aiming to stop the fighting.
The direct violence.
The direct violence, exactly. What the researcher Johan Galton called the killing and the injury you see on the news. True stability, or what he termed positive peace, that requires something much, much deeper.
And that would be the elimination of structural violence.
Yeah, precisely. Structural violence is it's the oppression baked into a society, the systems or laws that stop people from meeting their basic needs. Think hunger, lack of health care, discrimination. The research is just crystal clear on this. You can't have positive peace if people are suffering from structural oppression.
So you're building an environment where conflict is just less likely to even start instead of just, policing it after the fact.
That's the goal.
And our sources for this deep dive, we're talking about the Global Peace Index, the Positive Peace Report. They really hammer this point home. They also bring in something called the 7 dimensions of human security,
which is a crucial foundation for all of this. For peace to be positive, it has to be comprehensive. These 7 dimensions are basically all the things a person needs to feel secure.
Like what, for instance?
Well, you've got economic security, food security, health, environmental, personal, community, and political security. If any of those are missing for a big chunk of the population, you've got structural violence. The ground is fertile for conflict.
Okay, so if that's the environment we're trying to build, what's a psychological building block for the individual?
It all comes down to one thing: empathy.
Empathy.
Across all the sources, it's identified as the central prerequisite for peacefulness, whether you're talking about a dispute between neighbors or a global conflict.
But define empathy in this context. I mean, it's got to be more than just feeling sorry for someone.
Oh, absolutely. It's defined as the robust capacity to recognize human suffering and, this is the key part, to feel an urgent need to eliminate or alleviate it. It's the engine that drives people to reject violence.
Now, here is where, for me, this research gets really, frankly, a little unsettling. Empathy is supposed to be ingrained in us, right? But it can be disrupted, almost exclusively in childhood.
That's right. If a very young child experiences chronic violence or neglect, that crucial developmental window, it gets damaged. The research points to a correlation where the biographies of political figures who start or continue wars, they very often show signs of these negative childhood experiences.
But doesn't that risk oversimplifying things? Blaming a massive geopolitical conflict on one person's trauma.
It's a fair question. And yes, it would be an oversimplification if you look at it in a vacuum.
Right.
But the research argues we have to understand the root motivation. The specific fear in the source material from 2025 is that world peace might only be achievable when people who did not have those experiences, when they're the ones in power.
Because they have that undisrupted empathy.
They have the psychological prerequisite to just reject structural violence as a matter of course.
Which connects that personal factor directly to the most important preventative strategy in this whole framework: nonviolent child rearing.
The correlation is just. It's almost undeniable. There's a strong inverse relationship. Countries where violence and child rearing is common are measurably, significantly less peaceful.
And this is something you, the listener, can actually check. You can cross-reference UNICEF data on what they call violent discipline, Wikipedia's list of child corporal punishment laws, and the Global Peace Index. The results are stark.
They are. The most peaceful countries banned corporal punishment decades ago.
So how does this scale up from the family to the whole society?
Well, childhood violence doesn't just potentially create one aggressive leader. It helps create a population that follows violent orders. This gets into the idea of the authoritarian character or authoritarian personality.
How does that form?
Its roots are in a childhood where obedience is prioritized over everything, especially over empathy. When a child is raised with violence, they learn that submission is how you survive. And that conditioning makes people much more likely to follow orders later in life, even violent ones, without really thinking about it.
So the state of the nursery really is reflected in the state of the nation. Okay, let's pivot from the individual to the collective mind, to the law. This brings us to the legislation peace nexus.
Right. So if empathy is the prerequisite, then laws are sort of the public declaration of a nation's stance on violence.
Yeah.
And to measure this, the research uses something called the Culture of Violence Index.
Tell us about that index. What kind of laws are they looking at?
It scores countries based on the absence of protective laws. So a country gets a high score, meaning a high acceptance of violence, if it still has the death penalty, if it doesn't criminalize marital rape, if it allows corporal punishment in schools or at home, or if it permits torture and violence against LGBTIQ+ people.
Wow. So it's a comprehensive rejection of protecting the vulnerable. And the big finding is?
The finding is alarming. When you map this index against global conflicts, you find that wars outside of legitimate self-defense are almost exclusively started by countries that score high on that index.
So if a government legally allows violence against its own women, children, prisoners, it basically normalizes violence as a tool.
It completely normalizes it. Sustainable peace requires governments to show a consistent policy of nonviolence through legislation.
Yeah.
A clear statement that violence is never acceptable.
That's a powerful point. Let's connect that to gender, which is another key area.
Indeed. We have UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which confirmed that gender equality isn't just a rights issue, it's a security issue. And the data proves it. Countries with more gender equality are more peaceful.
And going back to empathy, the link seems obvious. If a society just ignores the oppression of half its population, it's failing a massive empathy test.
On a structural level, absolutely. And this brings us to the primary perpetrators of violence.
Yeah.
Men. The sources are very clear on this. Violence is a result of socialization, not genetics. A process one sociologist called violentization.
Violentization. So aggression is learned, and it's often intensified when young men don't have loving father figures, but instead get validated for being aggressive.
And the solution to that is promoting what's called caring masculinity. This is fostered by getting men actively involved in caregiving. It's why the sources push so hard for things like paid paternity leave.
Why is that so effective?
Because when a man recognizes the sheer fragility and needs of a young child, his capacity for empathy grows exponentially. You become less likely to treat human life as disposable.
So the strategy is twofold. Empower women, but also actively restructure the male identity.
Yes. Encourage men into social professions, nursing, teaching, provide counseling centers to help men break free from those rigid, traditional images of masculinity.
And we see this in society with things like the Male Allies movement or campaigns like White Ribbon.
Or even just using the hashtag Hefrosh. It's all about publicly rejecting that old rigid model.
Now, if we zoom out, this entire framework seems to align perfectly with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs.
They are the universal roadmap for this. Specifically, you have SDG 5 on gender equality and SDG 16, which is explicitly about peace, justice, and protecting children from violence.
But other SDGs play a role too, right? Like reducing poverty or improving education.
Oh, a huge role. When you improve living conditions, when you reduce that structural violence, frustration, and aggression in the population just naturally go down, the SDGs aren't just charity. They're conflict prevention.
So this all comes together under the banner of peace mainstreaming. How does that translate into action?
Peace mainstreaming is the commitment to weave these strategies into every part of society. It starts with the laws, but it has to extend into daily life. Education and media are huge here.
On education, you mean teaching skills, not just facts.
Exactly. Teaching and practicing nonviolent conflict resolution. Things like mediation or Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication.
And what are empathy circles?
A very simple, powerful practice.
Yeah.
You can teach it in schools with peer mediators. You basically just train participants to listen and repeat back what the other person has said and how they're feeling. That simple act of validation strengthens empathy and de-escalates conflict.
This focus on communication really shines a light on the role of the media, doesn't it?
A critical role. If all the media ever shows is war and crime, it creates this relentlessly negative worldview. It creates fear, and it can desensitize people to suffering.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative is responsible journalism that regularly reports on peace initiatives, on civil society organizations or CSOs. Show people that solutions exist, that change is possible. Give them positive models.
And we have to mention social media, which often seems to thrive on the exact opposite. On outrage and, wow, schadenfreude.
It's an environment that can be really corrosive to empathy. The sources even note with some concern that one major platform originated in a country with a high culture of violence index score. But this is where you, the listener, have some power. You can report hateful content, you can choose to consume and share solution-oriented news.
So to recap for everyone listening, the foundation is individual empathy that's protected by a legal framework that rejects violence, the legislation peace nexus, and then it's amplified by society through the SDGs, education, and media.
It is a long-term strategy, absolutely, but it's one that has to start now. Even if you live in a society that's struggling, the research suggests you can have a profound impact just by raising children without violence and advocating for those legal protections.
It's such a fundamental shift in focus, away from, the arms race and toward the nursery and the local courthouse. It's a profound finding.
It is. And it points to where the research needs to go next. The source material recommends that peace researchers should now specifically investigate the childhoods of political figures who have started wars, particularly in places like Asia and Africa, where that biographical research is often missing.
The ultimate goal being to pinpoint the fundamental psychological causes of conflict, so we can finally start to address them at the root. That's a deep dive that definitely gives us some real homework.
Indeed. Until next time.